Welcome, everybody, to another water cooler. It's been a while, and
Yes.
today's going to be fun. We're going to talk about Dune. Yeah.
No,
Let's
for
get
real.
right into it because I really enjoyed the
For
movie.
real.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Yes, the beginning was a little long, but yeah, I think for cinematography, costume design, all of it. Like, I think there should be an Academy Award nomination. I feel like there was some really, really good artistry done.
Mhm.
Those are my thoughts right there. Like, it was like I was blown away by the costume. That it was very. It just
Well,
everything just fit.
here's the fun part. Like I agree with everything you just said, but as one of those like ancient people who actually read the book like a million years ago and who has loved every ridiculous stilted word of it and who has suffered through maybe the worst book adaptation movie in the history of movies adapted from books, and then through
Which one are you talking about, by the way?
the
84 or
1984 the
2000?
1984
Okay.
Dune is it's hilariously bad. Like
Yeah.
we could spend an
Oh, it was
entire
awful.
hour talking about the levels of ridiculous all the way down to like the wildly popular and successful director who lobbied to have his name taken off of his own movie
Mhm.
because he was able to use the excuse, well, they left too much on the editing room floor. It's not my movie. It was terrible. I don't care if that movie was 5 hours long, that movie would have been terrible. So the new movie is wonderful, but it is even better for me in the context of this was a science fiction book that kind of straddled two different eras. Like it came in after the Tolkiens and the Asimovs and kind of what we think of as the pure fantasy and science fiction. And it was really the first one that used ecology of any kind as like a central tenet of the book. And in the 1970s, nobody gave a shit. Not a single person looked at a science fiction book about planetary ecology set on like a timeline over millennia and went, wow, like this is super relevant for our times, right? And so
Right.
it's taken a long time for that place in science fiction history that Frank Herbert kind of carved out to be relevant enough that when we see this huge spectacle of a movie, where the planet and the creatures on the planet are one of the central characters in it, that we just kind of accept that as reasonable, I think is a sign of how much time has passed between when Dune was actually released and when this movie could have been made.
Well, also, I will also say, and logical, that the creatures on the planet make sense within the ecology of the planet. If you had, prior to that, if you had, planet XYZ, and all of a sudden giant sandworms, came jumping out, I'm like, how do they live? Who cares? They're giant sandworms.
Right.
Let's just go fight them. Like that whole thing. And it was like, no, this all has to be logical, maybe not literal, but it has to fit logically together. Where would this work? And as you got further into the books and realized the life cycle of the sandworm,
Right.
and how they started and things like that, all of a sudden things came together even more. Going back to the costumes for a second, the thing I thought was amazing was that the costumes in the 2021 Dune did evoke on a certain level the costumes from the 84 movie. They were not, certainly not slavish, but they were evocative of. The style was just enough there. And I'm not sure if that's because some of it was embedded in the book and I just didn't pick it up when I was reading it as a young teenager. But I didn't get the quasi steampunk, quasi medieval overtones of the cowled dresses and the whatever you call drapey sleevey things and all that. Like, you can tell I deal with clothes a lot. I dress in black and white. I don't do clothes. Like, I am wearing clothes. That is the baseline for me. But I liked that. The thing that got me was the attention of detail to the languages.
Oh, yes.
Right? So I am a
Yes.
polyglot wannabe. And I will admit the wannabe part. I will own the wannabe part. I suck at 4 different other languages besides English, including American Sign Language. Like I am, barely conversant. But I just love the linguistics and the fact that, first of all, if you didn't know, the same person who invented the languages for Game of Thrones worked on Dune, including the signed languages.
I
And
didn't
I
know
actually,
that.
I can put it in the
Oh,
chat or the
yeah, you put it in our
comments.
chat, but prior to that, I didn't know that, and I just looked, I'm like, that's yeah, it's the linguistics of the movie is amazing. How
Well,
it
and
just
even that is like 1/5 of the book.
Yeah.
Like in the book, we learn that the hand languages are secret by house. So House Atreides has their own signaling language, and so much of it comes back to the original precepts of the book, which are carried in the movie but not explicitly said out loud. Is first and foremost, there are no computers. Right? There was an actual revolution at some point in the past where the kind of the story as it goes in the book is that the computers rose up, that there was some sort of AI, right? They crushed it, and what they decided was no computer can think more than a human. And so the things that they do have that are mechanical are very, very simple. And the mentats are the human computers. And so you combine like the specific lack of computing technology with the shield technology that says everything has to be slow and not fast, with kind of the neutralization of the nuclear threat, because apparently the shields and nuclear weapons don't interact well together, and it's made for this almost post technology civilization, where the style of your armor is part of how it is that you present your house, and it becomes part of the politics. And there was all of this, much like Lord of the Rings, where there's all of this detail around language and politics and religion and all of these things that are wrapped up in it. And if I had a critique of the 2021 movie, and we'll see when part 2 comes out, but it's that there's so much detail that is not just interesting to me as a nerd, but I think relevant to the story, that even in 2 movies, you can't do all of that justice. And so I think there's a lot of that if you loved those pieces of the movie, the languages, the dress, the religion, like the quasi religion, the Bene Gesserit gets completely skipped over as far as what they're trying to accomplish. The books have so much more of that you'll be able to fall in love with.
well, I mean, I think with any movie adaptation of a book, there's always going to be something that's off.
Sure.
A book is a book. It's rare to find a movie that is word for word just like the book. They're gonna stray because a movie it's a representation of the book or adaptation of it. It's not to say that they have to stick with it. And I think sometimes you can't get that same level of detail as you would in writing when you're performing. It's a little. I think it'd be difficult to do. And there are some movies that try, and a lot of times they're not very good. They. I mean, let's be honest, right? And the ones that um do stray a little bit from books tend to do well, maybe because they add that whole Hollywood to it, because people like Hollywood, right? Like I love reading books, don't get me wrong, but sometimes when you do stray and you add a little bit of Hollywood to it, it does maybe what's the word I'm looking for? Glorify or glamorize it a little bit, because it's a freaking movie. We want to see it visually. I want to see visual spectacular stuff, right? Just like the cinematography of the movie, I thought was amazing. The costume, the everything. That's different than the book. The book goes into it deeper, but that's your brain interpreting it now, and you're visualizing that differently. So now when you see a movie, you're like, okay, but it's I think it's harder to get all those details in the movie, so they pick what they can. And I think they did do well with the details. I feel the details really did make the movie.
So yeah, no, I think one thing, and yeah, they adapted to the medium, and I think this is where they did a really good job. Like I think Leon said in 1984 when he went, like when that movie came out, like he got a glossary, right?
They
And I
handed you
feel
out
like
little
if you look at it from yeah, and I get it. There's so much material in there, right? And there's so much stuff in the book, like, but I think they made the right decision to cut some out. It's kind of like writing good error messages, writing good exceptions, writing good corporate emails, right? You have to adapt to the medium, realize, you have people's attention for a certain amount of time because of the medium, whatever, and do that. And I think they did a really good job of balancing it because, I see, Gurney reading the Orange Catholic Bible. Someone who knows nothing about Dune, sees like Gurney, well, he's reading like the Bible or something, whatever, he's religious. It does the same thing. There was a lot cut out of the Bene Gesserit, right? But did they really have to say missionary protector was how they were putting the false, Messiah thing? So, in the next one, she can do what she does. I think they did, they did a lot of show no tell. They didn't mention the Butlerian Jihad and there are no computers, but you see the Orthodox, like you can tell, okay, this is entirely mechanically run thing. And if you don't know about the Butlerian Jihad, you just say, okay, this looks like an Apache helicopter model. It looks like a 1970s, just army reliable tech. And I think they made the right, I think they did the right part of skipping and doing that to present a book, something that was presentable to, both like super nerds and whatever. And kind of like the segue, one example is the water spitting thing, right? If you ever saw the 2000 Dune, they go a different. I think the water spitting was kind of like very close to the book how it happened. In the 2000 Dune, they wanted to really like focus on his prescience, right? And the arc of his growing prescience. He already had some level of prescience at that point. So he was the one that. So the guy spit in the floor, and he out of nowhere, not knowing anything, just because of his prescience, said, we accept your gift or whatever that was.
I
like
love that you
he knew what
that.
it was, and they did that to like foreshadow his prescience. Like, and I think this did a really great job of like being brutally cutting, and because if you went the other direction, you end up with David Lynch's Dune.
So I'm going to ask the hard question because I can't answer this for myself. If you hadn't read the book, for somebody who hasn't read the book at all, and let's say is not interested in reading the book, are you going to be able to follow any of this? Because I'm not sure I could have. I'm really not sure. Even if you accept that this is part one of a two-part, and maybe all of the payoff is in the second part, and I'm just willing to wait, I still don't know. Like, forget about. I mean, even it's Jason Momoa, so more so. But like Duncan, oh my gosh, it's Duncan Idaho. Like, I have that reaction, but that's because I already know him. But I really am not sure.
I disagree with you. I think you can, right? If you invest in the movie, I feel that you can jump into the movie without reading the book. Maybe not as in depth as someone who has read the book and understands the history, the story behind it. But a good movie, I feel, my opinion, that you can jump in without reading the book and reading the book at the same time. And I think that this one, there's probably some parts. Like you said, Duncan and everything, but I think this one you can.
Yeah, and
if you want more backstory, definitely read the book. But at the same time, like you said, not everybody wants to read a book. So yeah. Like same thing could be said for Star Wars movies.
Yeah, and I think the complexity of Dune is that when the book
Dune is a very complex story.
There are lots of threads, right? Like we've got a eugenics thread, and we've got a technology thread, and we've got a religion thread. We've got the politics of the Landsrat and the Great Houses thread. Like we've got all of these threads that kind of narrow themselves down, much as the story of it and even Paul's prescience kind of narrows down to a point in time that is kind of the big showdown at the end, that leads to him kind of taking the throne. I feel like with the meds, like there's still the politics, there's still the jealous emperor, there's still the emperor using his special his special warriors to augment this, to make sure that the Duke who is getting too powerful gets crushed. Like, there's still a little bit of the kind of cultural imperialism struggle of like the big bad Imperials against the Fremen who live in the desert. Like, I feel like all they really did was take the threads that either you have to be in someone's head to understand, or you have to know the history to understand, and they just kind of pushed them into the background. So I think if you came into the movie, what you see is this everybody against the Fremen, the desert against everyone, and the houses against themselves playing their own games. And then you see a spectacular visual movie. And I think you can. Like, my kids enjoy this. I have friends who didn't read the books who enjoyed it, who are excited for part 2, even though like they're not worried about part 2 as much as I am, knowing like what we've got to cover in another movie. So I think their experience of the movie is very different than ours, but I don't know. And I would say that the box office numbers show that people who weren't even close to being born when this book was still in print are still enjoying it. Now, I'm still nervous for part 2, but I think that I think they've done a good job of pulling on the threads that are relevant for people today socially, and then pairing it with an absolutely kick-ass visual experience.
Agreed.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I would be shocked if there's not an Academy nomination in one, at least there's got to be at least one category.
Yes,
I agree.
I wanted to go back to. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I don't think one thing like I've noticed was the tone. Like, I think if you read the book, it feels a little Shakespearean, and like the movie, the sci-fi they cap. I think they made it modern, and it feels like more like the modern depiction of like the modern depictions of royalty. Like, I think there's the scene where like Duncan and him hug, and then like he pledges fealty to the ring. He sees wearing the ring. Like, it was much more formal in the books. It's usually like much more formal. Like, it was much more formal in the book when he's like, okay, I know my place now or whatever. But there it was just like, okay, that would be how it happened. They were just 2 humans, and now, but he said, you know what, I'm being the experienced master sergeant, the experienced NCO, I've got to set the tone. That I've got to tell you that I've got to remind my officer to know his place now. We hugged, and now we're gonna act like
book, right? Like, I always think the book is going to, you're going to feel that in the book.
Right. But the difference is, in the book, he's younger. Like, Timothée Chalamet does an unbelievable job. I really think he was the perfect casting for that role. But he is a lot older in the movie than Paul Atreides was in the book. So in the book, it's much more, at least in my brain, it's much more evident that he's stuck between that, a boy being familiar with the people who raised him versus the soon-to-be Duke who will lead these people. And you almost feel that being stuck in the middle. And they tried to do that in the movie because, like, you can see he goes running across the landing field and hugs him, and his dad is behind him. The Duke is behind him and is very formal, with the whole thing. But I feel like that's one of the places where there's a lot more internal conflict that's built in the book, simply because in your brain, he's this small, wafy 15-year-old kid who's all of a sudden getting thrown into this situation versus what feels like an older, like mostly adult Paul Atreides in the movie. Again, it doesn't make it bad. It does, and I don't think it takes away from it at all, but it definitely, I remember, and 15 years old is probably about the age where many of us were when we were reading that book, and you kind of internalize that, which part of my life am I on at this point? And so I think that seeing that as someone in his 40s, like when I read that in the book, I pictured him way younger, way smaller than he was in the movie. Doesn't make it bad, and certainly doesn't make it bad if you didn't have that experience with the book, but it was definitely a difference for me.
But it's Hollywood.
Right. well, and that's also like, you have to find the problem with Ender's Game was that, where are you going to find a bunch of little kids to
have that caliber of acting?
Right. By the way, I don't remember their name, but the people who directed Stranger Things, I want them to make a real Ender's Game. that actually, because obviously they know how to direct kids. Like that's unrelated to Dune entirely, but I just wanted to put that out there. I wanted to also mention that Rebecca Ferguson as so
yes,
the thing that
yeah.
got, I mean, first of all, amazing performance overall, but the thing that I loved was the fact that she was allowed to be emotionally, I'm going to say inconsistent, in the sense that it's really easy to read this, Bene Gesserit consort or whatever, and like, I have a job and whatever, but she's all over the place. Like she actually loves her husband, even though this was in a completely arranged process. And she really
wasn't her husband though.
It was okay.
Yeah,
and
but that's just it. Like you said, like she had the range. She was a woman. Like she had the range of emotions, and you could feel it. You could see it in the scene.
And going and like walking in to talk to her husband after being completely terrorized about what was going to happen to her son, but knowing that she couldn't let any of that show on her face and having to pull herself together, and like all those different moments, she allowed herself to be all those things. And the directing and the writing all allowed her. And I need to call that out. The other thing I want to come back to just for a second is we were talking about the environment and the religion and the language and everything. But the thing that Dune itself and the movie allowed to show through was that these are all tools that people use. Obviously, desert power was a big thematic element, but language isn't a a thing you're born with, you have or you don't have. It's a tool to be used. Environment is a tool to be used. Religion is a tool to be used. And how you use it, what you do with it. And you saw that difference between Gurney using it as he's about to get off the ship versus that quasi-religious thing with the dead bodies on the Sardaukar homeworld, where, I mean, that was clearly a religious ceremony. And, like we have to recognize that if we don't use the tool will use us. And this is something that like probably we could riff on at Technically Religious, on a podcast at some point. But I love the fact that they just let it be. It wasn't a social commentary. It wasn't religion bad. It was just, this is a thing and it happens. So
well, and speaking of social commentaries, I would say that easily the thing about the book that has aged the worst is the role of women, full stop. I mean, if you think about in the book, there isn't a woman character who independently moves the story. Even Jessica is kind of being pulled along this path that has been laid for her by the Bene Gesserit. And even when she recognizes, I don't want to do this, she does it anyway. And every woman that's in that story, and again, this is an old man writing in the 1970s. Like every woman in that story is very, not even performative, very a fixed point in the plot, right? The women are the things that, again, going back to tools that we use, women are a tool that we use to accomplish X, Y, and Z. And so I feel like whereas Herbert was probably ahead of his time on the ecological message, I think he was very much a product of his time in how he wrote women's voices and how he wrote women's parts in these larger, like, imperial settings. And so really big kudos to the screenwriters who took that and turned her into, like you said, not just an important character and maybe the most important character in Paul's life, not just from a plot standpoint, but from an actual development standpoint, and gave her the depth of emotion that we kind of get some mention of because we spend a lot of time in the book in her head, like thinking about or being told what she's thinking about, and instead showing it on the screen with the way she dresses differently, right? With the way, like the interactions that she has kind of standing between the Fremen and the Atreides guards, right? Like I think that visually and with the part that they gave her to play, that she's the one doing, like that she's the one saying, the whole "only I will remain" prayer, right?
The do not, I shall not fear.
Right. That she's the one saying that while Paul is being tested was such a cool way of showing that it mattered to her, of showing that she knew what was happening and was terrified on behalf of her son. And I don't remember getting any of that in the book. So big kudos to them kind of dragging that part of the story into a modern context where those sorts of characters are not only appreciated but almost necessary in a story like that.
It makes you wonder how much more they're going to be able to do with Aaliyah when she.
Oh,
Sure, or even Chaney. I mean,
Chani, yeah.
like all of them. Those
I think
are
there's going to be
all.
more. I think
I think there has to be. The question is
yeah.
just what is it? How does it change the story for it to be more? And in the first movie, they did a really good job of making those parts real humans while not necessarily adding to or taking away from the story. I mean, at every point in this book, there is a woman corollary to Paul that is almost his foil, right? There's almost always a woman figure who is the I know that I should do A, but I have this B over here. I know I should be the Duke, but I want to be her son. I know I have to be the Messiah, but I want to be her husband. Like there's always somebody that is pulling him in the opposite direction. And if you can do that with a character that you actually believe, whose motivations feel real instead of just being staged to be the foil, then it comes across really well. And I'm hopeful because they did it really well in the first movie, but they've got two really tricky female characters to deal with in the second one.
And just to call out one thing, like if you look at what they did with Dr. Liet Kynes, actresses Sharon Duncan Brewster, and in a very short period of time, you meet her, you realize very quickly that she is something more than just the local ecologist. You, with a single sentence, I know that you were in love with a Fremen warrior and he was lost in battle. And you give her this whole world, this whole like reason to be. And of course, then you stab her through the chest. But like, just the fact that she stood as her own person and with a past and a present and a potential future that unfortunately the story rips away from you, but just so well done.
Yeah, and that's what I mean about it didn't change the story, right? If in the book, Liet Kynes is a man, and he's the plot device that we use to get the tell and not show about the ecology and what he's trying to do with the planet, and that it could have been a garden planet, and that they decided they needed the spice more than they needed this place to be what it could be. And like we're rapid fire told all of that in the book. And then when they find out that he's betrayed the Imperium, they basically just throw him in the desert. And the kind of the tidy ending to his story is that he gets taken by a worm and he kind of goes back to the Arrakis that he loves. And it's fine. I mean, it's really a plot device that's meant to tell us a whole bunch of stuff in a short amount of time. And so they took that, turned it into something that felt real and human. And it still ends the same way. It still doesn't become an ongoing character, but it felt a lot more real. And it felt a lot less staged in that part of the movie to progress to the next stage of action, which is the two of them getting stranded in the desert. So again, didn't break the story, didn't add anything unnecessary to the story, but made it way more human and brought in a female perspective in that I think ends up making it overall better without kind of adding or subtracting anything significant.
Yeah.
And we're all silent.
Right? Well, we're just digesting.
Well, I was thinking while you're talking, I'm like, this movie is one of the few movies that all my kids will sit and watch with me. Well, the ones that are local. But my daughter and my oldest son actually came home to watch the movie because mom has HBO Max and he doesn't have it. So he's like, I'm gonna watch at mom's house. My daughter's like, oh, Dune. Like they're like, oh, mom, you want to watch Dune? I'm like, well, yeah. What the fuck? Who do you think? Why? Like, am I like an old person that needs Yeah, no. We're watching Dune. So yeah, like it was a movie that we could all sit down and watch, and we all loved, and it was just like it was sort of like this family bonding time. And through generations, right? Like, because I'm ancient to them. Right. And and I see many families actually doing that. I mean, like Dooley, you're like, your kids loved it. So it's one of those and then my son texted me, he's like, hey, mom, do you think part 2 is going to come out, like soon? I'm like, I send them the link.
Can
I'm
we-
like, look, it's
Can
already
we
been
talk
confirmed.
about that? Can we talk about that for a second? So I don't understand WB at all in how they did this. So apparently, based on what I've read, they wrote the screenplay for both parts of the movie. WB bought the screenplay for both parts of the movie. They cast, shot, produced, and released the first part of the movie with absolutely no promise to anyone from the director down that the second part was going to be made until they saw the results. And it ended happy. The results were great. They've greenlit the second movie. They're now going to have to go back and make sure that everybody's available and figure out the schedules and reshoot the movie and re-edit the movie. And we're not going to get it till 2023. My question,
but 2023 is not that far away. I mean, 2022 is only like a month away. Think about that.
Stop it. 2019. I'm still getting over 2019.
So my question to the group is this: we've seen lots of kind of two clear models for this, right? We've got the Lord of the Rings model and the Hobbit that came after it, where the studio just agrees we're going to make the whole thing and we're going to shoot the whole thing and then we're going to edit and release and edit and release and edit and release, right? And then we've got kind of the what I would call like the Harry Potter / Marvel, where there's a set release schedule and we're going to release something in that slot, and they're all going to be shot as independent movies and nothing is promised going forward, although there's a framework for it. I feel like the director of Dune got shockingly disrespected. And I guess my question is it reasonable to feel like he would be disrespected building this movie off of this book with this cast and this budget with absolutely no promise that there would be a second one? Is that just bean countery? Or is that just going to be the new way things are now?
I think there's a mechanics piece that in between Lord of the Rings and now, what's become glaringly obvious, not just to people who are in the industry, but people outside the industry, is that reshoots are a thing. And that reshoots do not mean the movie sucks and we have to redo it. Reshoots are because, oh my gosh, the sound was horrible on that. Or, a bird flew through or whatever. And we're going to have to bring everyone back and go do it again. And they realize that reshoots are not the horrific admission of guilt that it once was, and that they're actually just a reality of the job. So if you already are going to know that you're going to shoot the film, produce, put it in the editing
maybe they
room,
already did shoot the whole film and we don't know.
And they're going to bring people back for reshoots. But I remember Tom Hanks talking about Castaway and the shocking decision that they made for that was that he was one weight and one particular way at the beginning of the movie, and then they do a fast forward of 5 years. Right. And he actually said to the producer, you know what we would do if we had any balls? We would cut for 6 months. I'd drop 50 pounds and then we'd shoot the rest of the movie. Right. And it was like, how will we do that? We can't promise everyone to like that was insane. And they decided to go do it. And he had like a $3 million rider on the contract that he had to lose 50 pounds. Like they said, how do you lose 50 pounds like that? I had all the motivation in the world to lose that 50 pounds.
Hey, if someone's dangling $50 million or at least $1 million,
right.
Yeah.
I will lose 50 pounds for you by next week. Okay.
Right. Exactly. So they like that, but that was, back a few years. So I think that the industry has realized that it is remarkably easier than they anticipated to get all the right people back again to do things again, to do a reshoot or to do a second version of a movie. And it doesn't cut the quality as much as they were afraid it did once upon a time.
But it's scheduling. Are the actors going to be that's the problem, scheduling.
It's in the contract. You have to be. You're not allowed to not be.
Well, but that's my question. How do you give Josh Brolin, for example, a contract that says, we want you to shoot this first movie and we're going to pay you for it, and we're going to put in your contract that if we decide the first was successful enough, you have to come back and do a second one? Like, do you pay them up front? Do you tell them that whether we make the movie or not, the actors are going to get paid? Like, these aren't small names in this movie. Like, these are people who have, I would imagine, lots of work that they could go do. And so the I hate large corporations that make movies part of me wants to say that this was WB hedging its bets at the expense of the audience, at the expense of the actors, like at the expense of being able to tell that story in a way that caters to the people who are buying the tickets, simply so in a pandemic, with them releasing everything on HBO Max, which I'm sure has to have some impact, even though we don't have any visibility into what that impact is, they didn't want to greenlight another, 150, $200 million movie until they saw the returns on the first one. Everyone else be damned.
I would say if anybody who's watching this is a SAG or AFTRA contract lawyer and wants to leave us a message in the comments, you could educate a lot of people about how those things work, because I sure don't know. I also, the other thing that jumped out at me, complete pivoting away, is that the delightful part about the movie for me was how intelligence is the superpower of the movie. Being smart.
Yeah.
Learning, like being able to understand what's happening around you, being intellectually flexible to say, oh, this is happening now. Okay. Like there's no moping. There's no like, I can't believe this is happening. Like, no, we're in a sandstorm. We're going to die. You better do something about it. And also the, like you can't punch the problem to make it go away. Even the people who fought that where fighting was their primary skill, it was evident that they were good fighters because they were smart, not because they were the strongest person in the room or the most invulnerable or the fastest or the whatever. And I just appreciate the hell out of a movie that puts, what's between your ears, and not, again, going back to your point about, scrawny 15-year-old as the primary character. How's he going to beat, House Harkonnen with, big, beefy, Batista as your, like, how will I win? It's not about being, invincible or anything like that. It's about, I'm going to be smarter, like, because that's what always works. I just appreciate that message a lot. And going back to the idea of families watching this, I hope that some of the conversation around the couch is, how would you be able to adapt to this? How would you go about learning these things? Which part of this world would be the most challenging for you to adapt to, to learn, to become part of?
Actually, that's what my kids were. My youngest and my oldest, they're 8 years apart, or about 8 years, 7 to 8 years apart. And those were some of the discussions they were having. I mean, 8 years is a pretty significant gap. And I felt like sitting down and watching movies like this, where they can both like be excited about it and have those conversations and those questions. The older one's asking the younger one, and the younger one is she's gonna be 15 tomorrow, going on 30. And it's just like I just sat there in awe and just watched them to discuss the movie, but discuss the book together as well, and how the book was adapted. And it was just kind of, and then discuss it, like you said, discuss how they would adapt and how it related to real life. I'm just like, holy shit, my kids are really amazing.
Right.
Yeah, like I'm like, wow, like this movie, it's one of the few movies that brought us together. That I can honestly say that my kids really my son actually was already home. And I'm like, oh, Ethan, you didn't like want to watch Dune? And he's like, oh, hold on. He was here within 6 minutes. He comes running to the front door. He's like, Ethan, can we start? I'm like, it's on pause. It's on pause. We restart. Right. But like he literally drew, like I'm pretty sure he sped, home, back home from his apartment. But he was like, yeah, like I want to watch this. And he stayed till like past midnight, and he never does that at his parents' house. God forbid he stays here long. But yeah, I mean, like he wanted to be here. My daughter, like, she's like, oh, Dune's on. She comes down, she grabs her blanket, and the dog's sitting there, and everyone's just kind of watching. I'm like, like movies like that, I feel like when you can pull everybody together from multiple generations and you're having these conversations, that is a good movie. You take a book, you adapt it, and you're bringing these generations together. You're just like, what? Like, how many movies can actually do that? Where it's a book, it's a movie, and now you got multi-generational watching it, not even watching, but loving it and commentating about it.
So there's two things that I wanted to bring up before we
Yeah, because I know you got. I just saw the clock. You got to go.
We're fine.
You got to
first of
adult.
all, I've got to adult. I'm not a very good adult. So the two things I want to bring up. First of all, I think Justin mentioned the ornithopters earlier. Hands down, like easily top 5 movie vehicles of all time. Like I thought that Star Wars had a lock on like the cool vehicles that become part of the story. The ornithopters are not only amazing, but are almost perfect to what was in my head, having watched the book, not knowing at all how that would actually work if you saw it in real life. Like that first scene where they get in and the wings start moving, I'm sitting in the movie theater going, that's it. That is exactly what that's supposed to look like.
That was
I
the
actually
part
was on the edge. I was like,
How does
Yeah.
that? Does it fly?
As I was reading that when I was, I don't know, 13, 14, 15, whatever I was, and that was the part I looked at the book and says, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Like there was
No,
just
it's
like,
not.
there is literally no way the mechanics of that would ever like, thank you, writer, for coming up with a complete fantasy thing. It flies because
my ex-husband's a Black Hawk pilot. I'm like,
right? Like, you know, it's like this is working because the speed of plot demands it. But otherwise, like in my head as I'm watching it, I can't. And then I watch the movie, I'm like, oh,
Right. Like there's the one point when they're first going out to look at the spice fields and they're flying up high and he folds the wing back and dives, and I'm like,
you know, all
What did he just
pilots are
do?
freaking out watching
It
this.
was
They're
amazing.
like, this shit can't happen.
like there are lots of like the moving staircases in Harry Potter. Like there are lots of things that you see in your head and you're like, holy shit, how are they going to turn that into something real? The ornithopters
yeah.
were amazing. And then the second thing is the biggest baddie in the entire movie we still haven't seen yet. Right? The Sting character from the 1984, I think it's Fade Rutha,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do we know who's been cast in that?
I don't
do we
Maybe that's
know
the
who
spider.
that's going to be?
I don't
Maybe
think
it's
it's
the
been
spider.
announced yet, has it? I'm looking here. I'm trying to see if that's been announced.
I don't even know that I want to know who it is. But like that's one of those characters that is, especially in opposition to Paul, right, being kind of the two most profitable ends of the eugenics experiment that is the Bene Gesserit, which again gets that's one of those threads that kind of gets pulled away from the plot a little bit in order to make it a good movie. But in the books, this is like the two alternate futures of mankind facing off at the end of the movie or at the end of the book. And so I am very interested to see who you would cast opposite Paul Atreides in that role. Like I can't wait for that part of the casting, because if they do as well with that as they've done with most of the rest of it, it's going to be pretty spectacular.
So I can't spoil it for you because it's in speculate. Even yesterday, there was a headline that, you know, the green lighting of part 2 has people now speculating who will
Right.
play this character. So we don't know yet.
As long as it's not Ben Affleck, I'm fine.
Yeah, please. Yeah. No.
For a number of reasons.
Okay. Well, I know, Dooley, you have to adult.
I do.
Yeah, and I sort of have to adult too. We're trick or treating tonight. Yes, we always do it that Thursday, the last Thursday of the month. I'm in Central PA. Okay, we have strange rules. That's all I gotta say.
I got you.
Yeah, it's strange rules here. So I have to get my costume ready and my treats ready for my little trick or treaters.
Awesome.
Got it.
All right, well, have fun. This was fun. I figure
great.
let's pick a movie and just do this every week.
Right?
Good. What's the next movie out what's a good movie out this week? Oh,
Eternals comes out next week.
Eternals, right? I was going to say
But-
Buzz Lightyear. Just if you haven't watched the trailer, Buzz Lightyear has an origin story now.
I saw
Right.
that.
It is
Our next movie could be how the Toy Story franchise broke Disney's unwillingness to make sequels, and I would argue that we are forever worse off for it. I don't want another Toy Story movie. I don't care about another Toy Story movie. Like
Jesse.
the first one was great. We have Brother Bear 2 because Toy Story 2 was popular.
Oh, I think Disney had a sequel problem long, but they've got Rescuers Down Under 12.
Right, but
Okay, so
none
next
of the
week-
but
next
that
week
was
we'll-
the Adam. Yeah, but that was
Next
like
week we'll
literally
meet
the
again,
big
and we'll
studio.
pick a movie.
though.
right.
How about
none
this?
of
We'll
them none
we'll
of the
pick a
part
movie for
2s
next
came
week.
out until Toy Story 2 was popular. Everyone, like if I would love to do a discussion like this. Look at the Disney and Pixar timeline.
Yeah,
And there was no Little Mermaid 2, there was no
Okay.
Aladdin 5, like none of that happened until Toy Story 2 did.
We will do that next week then. We'll talk about Disney sequels and see if they are relevant.
This is the best kind of ridiculous.
Because hey, and we can also bring in Netflix movies too, because I've been binge watching a lot of Netflix as of late.
As have we all. All right.
Yes.
Well, this was awesome.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. You have a great day. Bye.
Right, have a-
thank you. Bye.